Welcome to Our Confessions, a place where people share secrets they usually keep hidden, stories that are raw, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable. Today's confession comes from a user who calls themselves Hidden Watcher. What you're about to hear is not an easy story to tell, nor is it easy to hear. It's a story about obsession, guilt, and fear that grew from a single moment of concern and turned into something much darker. This isn't a story anyone should be proud of, but it's real. It's a confession from someone who feels trapped by their own actions and desperately wants to make sense of it all. So, if you're ready, settle in, because this story dives deep into the shadows of human behavior, where good intentions meet dangerous choices. It all began one late afternoon when I was walking home from the store. I noticed a kid sitting alone on a bench near the park entrance. He looked small for his age, probably around 15 or 16, and there was something about the way he hugged his backpack tightly that caught my attention. He seemed nervous, glancing around like he was waiting for someone who never came. At first, I thought maybe he just missed his bus or was lost. My first instinct was concern, not curiosity. I wasn't sure if I should approach him, so I kept my distance. Over the next few days, I found myself noticing him more often. Sometimes he was at the bus stop, other times near the corner store. It felt like he was always alone. I learned from a neighbor that his parents were having serious problems, and he was mostly left to fend for himself. This made me worry even more. I kept telling myself I was just being cautious and watching out for someone who might be in trouble. I convinced myself that keeping an eye on him was harmless, just a way to make sure he was okay without interfering. But inside, I felt conflicted. Was this concern or something else? Why was I so drawn to this kid's life? I told myself it was okay because I wasn't talking to him or crossing any obvious boundaries. Still, every time I saw him, I felt this mix of guilt and fascination building inside me. I knew that what started as innocent concern was beginning to blur the lines. It felt like I was walking a tightrope, and I didn't know if I would fall. As days turned into weeks, I started to notice a pattern in the kid's daily routine. He left his house early every morning, usually around 7 a.m., and took the same bus to school. After school, he often stopped by the local library or the corner store before heading home. Sometimes I saw him meet a few other kids, but mostly he stayed by himself. At first, I just observed from a distance, waiting at bus stops or sitting on park benches across the street, but slowly, my attention shifted from casual watching to something more focused. I began tracking his routes more closely, learning exactly which bus he took and where he spent his afternoons. One day, I even followed him on foot for a short stretch, telling myself it was just to make sure he got home safely. I know now that was wrong. I also found his social media profiles, public ones mostly, and started checking them regularly. His posts were few and mostly quiet, just pictures of schoolwork or occasional photos with friends. But for me, they became a window into his life, something I clung to when I couldn't see him in person. There were moments when I hesitated and felt guilty. I asked myself why I was so invested in someone else's life, someone I barely knew. I worried about crossing a line, but the pull was stronger than my doubts. It was like I had to keep watching, like something inside me wouldn't let go. I told myself I was protecting him in some way, even though I wasn't doing anything to actually help. Slowly, what began as concern became an obsession. I started planning my days around when and where I could see him. I'd feel restless and uneasy if I missed a chance to check in, whether in person or online. I couldn't admit it to anyone. I was trapped in this silent, dark routine, and I knew it wasn't normal, but I didn't know how to stop. There was a moment when I couldn't deny it anymore. I was no longer just watching from afar. I was stalking. It hit me like a punch when one afternoon I followed him off the bus, trailing behind as he walked through a quiet neighborhood. I stayed far enough back to avoid being noticed, but close enough to know where he went. My heart raced, not from excitement but from fear. Fear of getting caught, fear of what I was becoming. Another time, I saw him stop at a small park and sit alone on a swing. Without thinking, I sat on the bench nearby, pretending to read a book, just so I could keep him in sight. I felt like a shadow, silent and invisible. But every time I looked up, my guilt gnawed at me harder. Was this protecting him or just feeding my obsession? The risk of being discovered was real. Once, a stranger glanced in my direction with suspicion, and my breath caught in my throat. What if someone reported me? What if the police got involved? The possibility terrified me, yet I couldn't stop. I told myself it was for his safety, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Inside, I was torn. Morally, I understood how wrong this was. Stalking is invasive, damaging. But the compulsion to keep watching felt uncontrollable, like it had a hold on me stronger than my reason. I felt trapped between what I wanted to do and what I knew I should do. Every step I took after that was a battle, between right and wrong, between obsession and conscience. I was losing myself in the shadows I created. One afternoon, everything came dangerously close to unraveling. I was following him as usual, walking a few blocks behind when he suddenly stopped and turned around. For a split second, our eyes met. My heart dropped. I froze, caught off guard by the sudden awareness that he might have seen me. Panic surged through my body like electricity. I quickly ducked behind a parked car, trying to disappear into the shadows. The fear was overwhelming. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling. I wanted to stay hidden forever, but I knew I had to move. I ran down an alley, twisting and turning through streets I barely knew, desperate to lose any trace of myself. When I finally stopped, I leaned against a wall, gasping for air. My mind raced with thoughts of what could happen if he told someone, or worse, if the police got involved. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every passing car sounded like a threat. I imagined sirens outside, neighbors talking, and the shame of being caught. But despite the terror, the next day I found myself drawn back, like a moth to a flame I knew would burn me. The risk had never felt so real, yet I couldn't stop. I kept telling myself it was just one more day, one more moment to check if he was okay. The compulsion was stronger than the fear, even though the fear screamed louder than ever. I was trapped in a cycle of anxiety and obsession, knowing that one misstep could end everything. But I needed to see him, to know he was safe, even if it meant risking everything. As the days went on, I found myself making excuses for what I was doing. I told myself I was protecting him, watching out for something no one else saw. Maybe someone was hurting him, or maybe he was struggling and needed help. Those thoughts gave me a fragile sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. It wasn't about obsession, I convinced myself. It was concern, care, even kindness in a twisted way. Sometimes I blamed loneliness. I felt isolated, disconnected from the world, and this strange connection to the child filled a void I couldn't explain. I told myself I was just curious, or that I was looking out for him because nobody else did. Denial wrapped around me like a blanket, comforting and dangerous. I wanted to believe I wasn't doing anything wrong, but deep inside, the truth was creeping in. I knew what I was doing was invasive and wrong. I felt guilt gnawing at me, sharp and constant. Every time I rationalized my actions, a part of me screamed in protest. The lines between right and wrong blurred, but I couldn't fully escape the shame. I was trapped in emotional confusion, torn between the part of me that cared and the part that was slipping into something darker. At night, the guilt was suffocating. I lay awake, replaying moments when I crossed boundaries, questioning myself, wondering how far I'd gone and how much farther I could fall. The denial was weakening, but I wasn't ready to face the full truth yet. I was lost in a fog of conflicting emotions, concern, loneliness, guilt, and shame, all tangled together in a mess I didn't know how to fix. I knew I had to stop. The guilt, the fear, and the shame were crushing me. So I tried. I deleted my fake social media accounts that I had created just to follow him. I told myself I wouldn't go near the places he usually went. I tried to keep busy, distracting myself with work, hobbies, anything to fill the emptiness that drove me to watch him. But it wasn't easy. The pull was strong, like a silent voice whispering that just one quick check wouldn't hurt. I found myself standing outside his school or favorite park, frozen, unable to walk away. Sometimes I convinced myself it was for his safety, other times just to satisfy my curiosity. Every time I relapsed, the guilt hit even harder. The pattern was a trap. I'd make promises to quit, only to break them within days, or even hours. Each time I gave in, the shame deepened. It was like being caught in quicksand. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. I hated myself for it, but the obsession had a hold on me that felt impossible to shake. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming. I was torn between wanting to protect him and knowing I was hurting myself and him by crossing lines I shouldn't. Every failed attempt to stop added another layer of tension and suspense. Would I ever be able to break free? Could I find peace before something terrible happened? In those dark moments, I felt completely alone with my secret, caught in a web of compulsion and regret. And yet, the dangerous cycle kept spinning, faster and faster. The more I watched, the more it consumed me. Stalking wasn't just something I did. It became who I was. The secret weighed heavy on my mind, and I felt trapped in a cycle of shame and fear. Every day, the guilt gnawed at me, making it hard to focus on anything else. I became isolated, pushing away friends and family because I was too scared they'd find out what I was doing. My mental health deteriorated quickly. Anxiety wrapped around me like a suffocating fog. I constantly feared being caught, the panic hitting me at unexpected moments. I'd jump at every sound, convinced someone was watching me, just like I was watching the child. Sleep became a stranger, replaced by restless nights filled with worry and regret. The shame was unbearable. I hated myself for what I'd become. I wasn't proud of my actions, but I felt powerless to stop. The secret controlled my every thought, making me distant and withdrawn. I was a prisoner of my own obsession, desperately trying to maintain control while knowing I was losing it. The pressure built with each passing day. I knew I was on the edge, teetering between stopping and going even further down this dark path. Desperation settled in like a cold shadow, and I felt more alone than ever before. Would I find a way out, or would this secret destroy me completely? The suspense of my own unraveling was almost too much to bear. In the end, I was caught between two worlds, one where I longed for normalcy and one where my dangerous fixation threatened to pull me under forever. The moment everything changed hit me like a sudden crash. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or police knocking on my door. It was something quieter, yet far more powerful. One afternoon, while I was following the child from a distance, I noticed a stranger nearby watching me. Panic surged through me. For the first time, I truly felt the weight of how dangerous this was. Not just for him, but for me. I froze, heart pounding. The stranger's gaze held a mixture of suspicion and concern, and in that instant, I saw myself from the outside, a broken, desperate person caught in a dangerous game. That was the moment reality hit hard. I wasn't just curious or concerned anymore. I was a threat. I was crossing lines I couldn't uncross. Later that night, the fear settled deep inside me, and I began to think about what my actions really meant. I realized how much I was hurting myself, and possibly others. The risk wasn't worth it. The secrecy, the lies, the obsession, it was all spiraling out of control. But even in that dark moment, a small flicker of hope sparked. I knew I had to change, to find a way out of this nightmare before it was too late. The turning point was terrifying, but it also opened a door, one where I could start to rebuild, to heal. What the future held was uncertain. Could I really stop? Would I find forgiveness from others, but more importantly, from myself? The suspense of that unknown path haunted me, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, I could break free. After everything I had been through, I finally decided to confess anonymously on Reddit. It felt like the only place where I could be honest without fear of immediate judgment or punishment. Writing it all down, the obsession, the guilt, the near escapes, was terrifying but also oddly freeing. For the first time, I wasn't hiding in silence. I'm filled with fear and shame. Fear that someone will recognize me or that my secret will spread beyond this digital space. Shame because I know what I did was wrong, deeply wrong. Yet, I also feel desperate for help, for someone to understand what it's like to be trapped inside my mind. This isn't a cry for sympathy, but a plea for guidance. I want to stop. I want to heal. But I'm scared I won't be able to break free from this cycle on my own. The addiction to watching, the constant anxiety, the guilt, it's a heavy burden. I'm reaching out because I need advice, support, or even just a listening ear. I know this story might shock or upset people. I don't expect forgiveness or easy answers. What I want is honesty. From myself, and from anyone willing to share what they think or feel about my situation. This confession isn't the end. It's the start of a long, uncertain journey. I don't know if I'll fully recover or how my life will change. But I do know one thing. I can't keep living in the shadows of this secret. So here I am, finally stepping into the light, hoping, fearing, and waiting to see what comes next.